What's up, guys? Today we're going to be checking out another projector. This one I know a lot of you guys have been waiting to check out. It is the JVC NZ7. This isn't the 8 or 9 that I was hoping to get as my personal replacement for the NX7. But this is the next best thing, so shout out to Robert for sending this out to me for review. Thank you, Robert. If you want to pick up one of these projectors, you can pick it up from his store. So let's go ahead and get this thing unboxed. It's been kind of hard to get in because they're so sought after. But inside, we get the accessories box, manuals, some documentations, the power cord, the batteries, and the remote control. Then we have the projector itself right here. All right, look at that. It's been a while since I had a JVC in. And this is way bigger than the Sony XW7000es that I've been rolling with for the past 7 months. But let's just take a quick look up front. Up front we get the lens itself. So there is no automatic lens cover for this. All right, so around back, we get 2 HDMI ins. The HDMIs are HDMI 2.1 compliant, so they are 48 gigabits per second. We get your serial port, USB input, Ethernet, and a trigger. And on this side are your controls for power, menu, your control pad is the back button. And there's also a rear IR input as well. Now this is a native 4K projector, but this will have 8K eShift. So native is 3840 by 2160, but with JVC's eShift, it will give you 8K resolution. Specs wise, this is 2200 lumens of brightness. It is rated at 20,000 hours, and this is a laser projector for this year. The previous models were regular bulb base, which are maxed at about 6,000 hours, or 5 to 6,000 hours. But this here is 20,000 hours. So this is their newest generation for 2022 laser with 2200 NC lumens. So let's go ahead and get this set up in the theater. Today we're going to be checking out 2 projectors, the JVC NZ7 and the Sony XW7000es. Now this will be a somewhat unfair comparison because this is the entry-level JVC projector versus the Sony flagship projector. So the price difference between the two is basically double the price. But before we get to some of the comparisons, let's run through some of the settings on the JVC projector. I'm not going to go through the Sony settings because I already covered that in a separate video. So if you missed that video, I will leave a link to that video down below in this video's description. Now to access the JVC's settings and the menus, you will have to hit the menu button on the remote control. Now just a little side note here, if this gets back to JVC, I would love if you guys could upgrade your remote control because every single one of these buttons is perfectly flat. So in order to find the buttons, you will have to hit the light button on the remote control, which will illuminate all the keys. That is the only way you're really going to be able to find every button, because usually if I'm going to hit the menu button, I'm usually hitting the picture mode button or maybe the left arrow key by mistake, or I can never find what button I'm looking for because all of these buttons are basically just joined all together. So it's like nearly impossible to figure out what button is what in the dark. So the first option here, we can see that we've got content type, which will automatically switch between SDR, HDR10+, HDR10, or HLG. And as you can see right now, this is the main homepage of the Kaleidoscape, which is in SDR. The next option here is picture mode. We get a few different options here. We've got natural, cinema, user 1, user 2, and user 3. So you've got 3 presets which you can specify with your own settings. Under more settings, we've got your picture mode once again. Under laser power, we've got low, which you can see dims down the picture pretty significantly. We've got mid, which brightens up the picture. And then we've got high, which will illuminate the image at max brightness, but also it will ramp up the fan a lot louder. So typically for SDR content, I'll leave it on low. And for my space, I do find that mid looks the best for HDR material. Of course, the larger screen size, the brighter you're probably going to want to run the laser. So you're probably going to want to go up to like high if you're running something like bigger than 120 inches or more. Under dynamic control, this will brighten the laser or lower it down depending on how bright or dark the scene is. So it'll automatically adjust the brightness of the laser. Under aperture, right now I've got it totally open, but you can close it down if you want to enhance black levels, or if you want to keep it wide open, this will give you the most light output. And then here we've got sliders for contrast, brightness, color, and tint. The next option under color profile, we've got a few different settings here. We've got automatic, BT709, 2020, DCI, video, or cinema. Under color management, you can turn this on or off if you want to adjust the color selections here. If you do have measurement tools, I do not have any measurement tools, so I'm just going to keep this off and just go with the out-of-the-box settings. For color temperature, we've got 5500K, 6500, 75, 93, high brightness, custom 1 and custom 2. If you are running this in SDR, you do get a few different gamma presets you can choose from. You've got 2.2, 2.4, 2.6, Cinema 1, 2, and 3 custom modes. You can also come down here, change the color selection of white, red, green, or blue, change the picture tone, dark level, and the bright level. Under MPC/E shift, this is where you can turn on or off the 8K upscaling. Right now we had it on, but now we are going to turn it off. There are a few different presets under that as well. There's standard, high res, and high res 2, which you can tailor that to your liking by changing the enhance, noise reduction, BNR, or MNR sliders. Under motion control, we've got clear motion drive, motion enhance, or low latency if we're running some video games into the system. So if you do want to get that soap opera effect, you can turn that on and off here. Next section here, we've got your input level, which you've got options for auto, 16 to 235, 0 to 255 for PC, or 16 to 255. But if you are going to be watching this for film, you're probably going to want to keep it on auto or 16 to 235, which is what usually films are mastered at. And for color space, we've got auto, 444, 422, or RGB. This projector does support 3D out of the box if you do have the adapter. So in order to use 3D, you will need this adapter, also some active 3D glasses. And here you can change the 3D format from auto, side by side, top and bottom, or 2D. You can adjust the parallax and the crosstalk as well. Under automatic picture mode select for SDR, you can pick either the last setting, natural, cinema, user 1, user 2, user 3, or use the last setting for SDR material. And the same thing for SDR, HDR10, and HLG. And the last option is the HDMI ED/ID settings. Next section here, we've got your installation settings. We've got your lens control, which is your focus, zoom, and shift. You can turn the image pattern on or off, and then you can reset the lens and send it straight back to the center of the screen. Under pixel adjust, if you are noticing you're getting a bit of fringing for red or blue, you can adjust that here. You would go under, choose your color, choose your pattern, keep that on, go under pixel adjust, and then you will see that you have a grid that shows up. So if you're getting a little bit of red fringing, you can slide over the red till you get a nice clean white line, and vice versa for the red and the blue as well. Here you've got masking, anamorphic lens support, which you can turn on and off. Under screen setting, we've got screen adjust on or off. Under screen size, this will help with the theater optimizer, which adjusts HDR on the fly. So you would input your screen size, your screen aspect ratio, which is either 16:9, 17:9, CinemaScope, and then back to 16:9. And then you would add your screen gain here, which my screen is a 0.8, which is a Harmony G2 acoustically transparent screen. And that'll work in conjunction with the theater optimizer. The next option we've got is installation style, which we've got front mount, ceiling mount, front, rear, or ceiling mount, rear. There's keystone correction. And then under aspect, we've got native, auto, or zoom. So you're probably going to want to keep this on either auto or native, so you're not chopping off any picture. The next section here, we've got back color. You can choose between blue or black. Menu position, we've got lower left, lower right, top left, top right, left, center, and then the right side of the screen. You can turn on and off the signal display, turn the logo on and off, and then for language, we get a bunch of different options there. Next section, we've got your trigger, off timer, eco mode, network settings, remote control code, high altitude mode, which will ramp up the fan, hide mode, which will blank out the screen, factory reset, and then do a software update. And then the last section is your info section, which tells you what input you're on, what source is feeding into the projector at the time, resolution, color space, colorimetry, how much time you have on your lamp, and then the software version. And that is it for the settings on the JVC NZ7. All right, so the first scene that we're going to take a look at here is Batman v Superman. This is at the beginning of the movie at the opening credits. So I want to just take a look at how the JVC operates with the HDR optimizer. I've got the theater optimizer on. This is in that section where you can specify your screen size and your screen gain. So it automatically adjusts the HDR according to that. And then I have HDR level on auto. Now, if you don't want to go auto, you want to go to -2. You've got -1, got 0, +1, and then a +2. You can see how the image kind of brightens up. So you will start losing some detail in the highlights, and then it also as well lifts up the blacks as well. So for HDR level, you're probably going to want to keep this on to kind of keep the shadow detail and as much detail as possible if you're watching some bright content. I've also got the AKE shift turned off since the Sony doesn't have AKE shift, so I didn't want to put any advantages over to the JVC side. Now, if you look at the picture here, if you look at that sign where it says Excalibur, there should be some square blocks running horizontally and also 2 going vertically as well, which for this particular scene, you can't really make out the horizontal lines going across or any kind of detail in that particular sign. Although the shadow detail where the guy that's running away, you can clearly see his face. There's a bit of detail in the shadows. I don't know if this is going to make out, if you can make this out in the video or not, but you can see his face pretty well, and also the brick wall behind him has got some pretty good detail and textures also. Now, let's go ahead and switch over to the Sony. Now, for the Sony, if we're looking at the sign where it says Excalibur, you can see every single one of those lines going horizontal and also vertical. The shadow detail, I think personally, if you were here in person, the blacks are slightly more raised with that guy running away, and also the detail in the back also seems a little bit lighter coming from the JVC. So for this particular scene, I'm gonna have to give the win to the Sony just because that highlight detail is so much more visible. Now for the settings on the Sony, I do have this on reference. I've got reality creation turned off. I've got dynamic enhancer turned off. And then I have the laser light control. I've got that turned off, and then I have the output turned up at 70. I've got the laser output on the JVC turned to mid. So I'll find that 70, and then medium is kind of almost the same brightness between the 2 projectors. Now if we were to turn the dynamic control on limited, you can see that it will kind of dim down the image since most of the image is dark. So it will kind of tamp down the laser to enhance black levels. That's unlimited. And then if you want to put it on full, then the image does get darker, blacks do get better, but also the shadow detail overall brightness does kind of take a hit. So for me personally, I think the blacks look great on this Sony projector, even with the dynamic control turned off, that I personally like to keep it off. Now for the dynamic HDR enhancer, I've got this turned off, but as we go up, if you keep your eye on that sign where it says Excalibur, all that highlight detail starts getting clipped away. So that's low, that's medium, everything's almost gone. It's kind of bleeding into the Excalibur text. And then high, it just pretty much washes out any kind of detail you have in the highlights. So for me personally, I kind of like to keep it on off. Again, very much like the other Sony that I had previously, which was the 285ES. This is kind of one of those things where you're going to have to mess around with the dynamic HDR enhancer, kind of like on a movie by movie basis. So certain dark movies, I find that keeping it on low is kind of like the best medium between low, medium, high, or I just like to keep it off altogether. So it's one of those things where it's not like the JVC where it does it automatically frame by frame. You kind of get a nice result automatically with the JVC. So with the Sony, you kind of have to mess with it. But now going back to the JVC, I think if you can see the overall picture, I do feel like the black levels do look better on the JVC, whereas on the Sony, the black levels do look a touch raised. And one thing that I wanted to check out with the JVC is the dynamic control, which on those fade to blacks, the projector will dim down so that you'll get a black screen, and then it'll come out either slowly or quickly out of a black scene and go straight into something bright. So right now I find that mode 1 works best for me. Now if we go ahead and play this clip here, every time the scene changes and it fades down to black, you can see that the entire screen basically turns black and it just shuts off, and then it comes straight back out. All right, so now let's go back and check out the same scenes on the Sony, but this time we're going to turn dynamic control of the laser light on full. So here, when the image dips down and fades to black, there is no change in light output. It just remains at one constant level. And you can see when it does fade out that the blacks are actually a little bit more grayer than what was seen on the JVC. So the black levels are not only a bit deeper on the JVC, but on these fade to blacks, you get a completely black screen, whereas on the Sony, it just doesn't do that at all. And this was on dynamic control on full, output at 70%, and this is also with dynamic HDR and enhancer on low. So it doesn't matter if it's on high, medium, or low, or if I keep it on laser light, on full, limited, or off, the fade to blacks just remain at one constant black level. So now this next scene is from Top Gun Maverick. And again, as with that little demo from Batman v Superman, we can see, if we take a look at how the sky is in the background there, how bright it is, if we compare this over to the Sony, you can see there's actually more tone, more clouds in the background. So there's more gradational tones in there. And also, if you look in the upper left corner, you can also see that there's a reflection of light coming off of the glass off of the cockpit in that plane. Whereas on the JVC, you don't even know that there's glass up there. There's no reflection in the top of the glass. And this is with the HDR optimizer turned on automatic. Now, if we want to bring that highlight detail back in the same ballpark as the Sony, if we take it off of auto and bring it down to a -2, you can now see that those reflections in the upper left corner in the glass are now visible. Whereas on automatic, the automatic frame by frame HDR processing was actually blowing out that detail. So it's not always foolproof. You can also see the amount of detail in the gradations in the clouds in the background now a lot better if you take it down to a -2. If we want to brighten that up a little bit, we bring it up to -1. And then at 0, things start getting blown out as well. So I mean, kind of like if you want to meet it halfway, I'd say maybe a -1 is going to bring it very close to what the Sony looks like. So in comparison, this is the JVC, and then here we have the Sony. Now, although I do think that HDR optimizer works really well, and I think it works better than Sony's HDR optimizations, the JVC definitely doesn't get it right all the time. So there are some times you're going to have to do manual intervention, and not only the Sony, but also in the JVC as well. But I just do find that the JVC works better most of the time with its HDR optimizer turned on. So there's a little bit less guesswork on the JVC than the Sony. Now, the next thing that I want to take a look at is how sharp and crisp the image is on the JVC. Now, this is a scene from Top Gun Maverick, and this looks fantastic on the JVC. I mean, if I only had this projector by itself and I didn't see anything else better, I would think this looked nearly perfect. I mean, just the amount of detail in Tom Cruise's face, you can nearly count every single one of his pieces of stubble on his chin, on his cheeks. And if we focus in on those wrinkles on the top of his forehead, that thing looks pretty darn sharp. Now let's skip on over to the Sony. Now I think the first thing you're going to notice is that the JVC is brighter, especially with that HDR optimizer. It does bring up the shadow detail and the overall picture brightness. But if we look at the same detail on his chin and also those wrinkles on his forehead, I think that the Sony looks to be maybe about 10% sharper and 10% crisper and more detailed over the JVC. And this isn't something where you really need to get up close to your projector screen to see the differences. From about 6 to 8 feet away from my main seat, that just overall, the overall picture sharpness and clarity definitely goes to the Sony. It just looks cleaner overall, whereas it just kind of makes the JVC look a little bit softer and a little bit more blurrier. So if we take a look at this side by side here, I did take a couple of still shots that you should be able to see that there's more texture on the Sony, whereas on the JVC, those fine crisp edges are just a touch softer all around. There just seems to be more texture overall on the Sony projection, where it's softer on the JVC. At the time of this video, the JVC NZ7 is selling for $11,000, and the Sony XW7000es is selling for $28,000. So the question is it worth paying nearly double the price for the Sony over the JVC? Well, for one, the Sony is brighter, so if you've got a really large screen, the Sony is gonna light up that thing and make HDR content a lot more vibrant. It'll also help if you have ambient light in the room. The Sony is also a lot quieter when you have the laser on full brightness. If the JVC is in the same room as your screen and it's on max, it's gonna get pretty distracting. If it's in a different room, then it's a non-issue. The Sony clearly has the better lens, so if you want the absolute most detailed image, then the 7000ES is gonna be it. The JVC is still really good, but when you see them side by side, it becomes obvious which one can produce the most detail. Even with the 8K upscaling turned on, the sharper lens on the Sony just wins out. I found the color on the Sony to have a much more richer saturated image, which made the picture have more depth, while the NZ7 I thought felt flat in comparison. Now, where I thought the JVC had the edge over the Sony was with its HDR optimizer. With most of the stuff that I watched, the JVC gave a consistently more pleasing image, keeping shadow detail from being too dark and highlight detail from being overblown. I always had to go in and manually adjust the HDR enhancer on the Sony depending on the movie. I also thought the blacks were a bit better on the JVC NZ7 because the optimizer was doing such a good job. Another thing worth mentioning for all you 3D fans out there is the Sony now requires you to purchase a 3D emitter if you want to watch your 3D movies. On previous Sony models, all you needed were the 3D glasses. So whether you go for the JVC or the Sony, you will have to buy another accessory. Overall, they both had their strengths and weaknesses. The JVC's biggest strength over the Sony is that it costs half the price for maybe 80 to 85% of the performance of the Sony, and that's crazy impressive for the money. It's also future ready with HDMI 2.1 and 8K upscaling support. Now, if you have the spare change and a huge home theater, then the 7000ES is going to be the way to go for maybe the best picture quality in its price class. Well, those are my thoughts on the JVC NZ7 and Sony 7000ES 4K projectors. Have you guys gotten a chance to see any of them, and which brand do you prefer? Leave a comment down below and let me know. Now, if you do want to grab any of these projectors, you can pick them up at Value Electronics. I'll leave a link down below in the video's description. Just give them a call and tell them that we sent you. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to give this video a like if you found it useful. You can also follow us on social media, and if you want to support the channel and get discounts on projectors and exclusive content, consider joining our Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.